So we are very happy to continue our next hour. And please, the colleagues, could you? So we are very happy to be here with you over this long night to put again on the agenda some very, very important topics. And the title of the section is How to Build on the UDHR to Promote New Rights. And I think this is very important. But we asked you before to refer to the existing convention and how you how this serves for your fights. So I welcome Antine Sonde, who's he is written Senior Fellow Indigenous Peoples and Minority Sections, but I think it's about autochthone rights, and we will switch in French. And I'm just welcome Antia Taderera, who is next to me, and we will speak following with you because you are advocacy advisor and Universal Periodic Review, and the question about sexual rights, self-determination, and we will dive into this. But now we start with French.
Peut-être rapide de passage en français. Je crois que c'est intéressant parce que nous allons parler à la fois de nouveaux droits qui ont commencé à être acquis et qui existent et qui ont déjà une expérience finalement d'existence dans les déclarations, et puis de choses qui sont encore à faire et qu'il faut que nous renforcions et que ce pourquoi il faut aussi lutter. Donc peut-être cette première partie sur les droits indigènes, et je crois que ce serait intéressant de commencer par une petite histoire parce que tout le monde ne connaît pas l'évolution et comment ça s'est intégré peut-être dans la déclaration et quelles déclarations particulières ont été faites par rapport à ça. Et on viendra ensuite sur les conséquences de ça.
Tout d'abord, je voudrais vous dire merci pour cette opportunité de pouvoir aborder cette question assez importante par rapport à la question des droits des peuples autochtones, qui, à un certain moment, a été une longue lutte, mais heureusement que ça a été intégré en rapport avec la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme. Donc, juste pour dire que c'est un long chemin qui a abouti à quelque chose. Même la déclaration aussi a été un long chemin de combat. Pour qu'on aboutisse à la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, ça fut des discussions et sur des échanges. Donc, dans tous les domaines des droits de l'homme, toujours pour aboutir à quelque chose, il y a un long chemin de combat pour qu'on aboutisse à quelque chose. Donc, alors, juste un petit rappel que ça fait exactement 100 ans aujourd'hui que l'un des premiers pionniers de l'Amérique, de la première nation, a mis pied à Genève et a été rejeté à la Société des Nations. Il n'a pas eu accès à la Société des Nations pour parler de son peuple, de sa communauté. Mais heureusement que les portes de la ville de Genève ont été ouvertes et il a été accueilli. Et c'est pourquoi la ville de Genève a célébré cette année, au mois de juillet, ce premier contact avec ces défenseurs des droits des peuples autochtones au niveau de l'Amérique. Donc voilà un peu. Et à partir de cette date, il y a eu donc des mouvements qui sont nés. Et dès les premiers moments, il y a eu déjà l'Organisation mondiale, le BIT, qui a eu un intérêt particulier en 1921 déjà, qui parlait du travail des peuples autochtones. Déjà, il y avait eu ces mouvements qui ont commencé à naître depuis les années 1920, mais c'est à partir des années 1960, au regard de la décolonisation et des questions de décolonisation qui se prévalaient, soit aussi les questions de liberté au niveau de l'Amérique, avec aussi ces changements de mentalité dans aux États-Unis, ça a influencé ce mouvement de naissance par rapport à la question des peuples autochtones. On appelait population autochtone ou indigène. Voilà donc les appellations qu'on avait auparavant. Mais à partir de 2000, il y a des changements qui commencent à s'opérer. Un groupe de travail a été mis en place. Et ce groupe de travail va travailler pendant plus de 30 ans, plus de 20 ans. C'est en 2006 que le système des Nations Unies, surtout à l'Assemblée générale, ils vont commencer à leur 107e séance plénière, ils vont voter, en réalité, ils vont adopter la déclaration qui a été longtemps discutée jusqu'à la 107e séance plénière de l'Assemblée générale. Donc, voilà donc, à partir de 2007, il y a une déclaration maintenant officielle. Le 13 septembre 2007, la déclaration a été officielle. Et à partir donc de cette déclaration, elle n'est pas en contradiction avec la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, il faut le préciser. Pas du tout. Elle est, puisque dans la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, il est dit que c'est le droit de tout peuple de se considérer comme différent. Donc, il appartient au peuple autochtone, s'ils se considèrent différents, c'est de leur droit de se considérer comme différents. Mais ils ont besoin quand même des articles ou des lois qui leur permettent de répondre à leurs besoins, à leurs réalités. Si la déclaration ne prenait pas certains aspects, la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, il y a des aspects particuliers que ça ne prenait pas en compte. Il fallait donc, à partir de ça, prendre en compte certains aspects qui est l'autodétermination et qui est très important dans la Déclaration des droits des peuples autochtones.
Dans ce domaine, comme dans bien d'autres, la déclaration ne fait pas tout. Et on est aujourd'hui dans je crois que les 24 heures ont montré ça très, très, très bien, entre un durcissement extrême du capitalisme qui est dans voilà, Plezel l'a dit, dans une sorte de quête de résistance, et peut-être la fin, mais toujours est-il, ils sont prêts à se battre jusqu'au dernier truc. Donc on a à la fois une sorte de radicalisation, je dirais, et de brutalisation du capitalisme, et notamment dans les questions écologiques et dans les questions justement de territoire autochtone. Et puis en même temps, on a une sorte de reconnaissance du savoir autochtone comme peut-être sauvetage par rapport à l'écologie. Et j'aimerais bien que vous réagissiez un tout petit peu avec vos connaissances à ces choses-là.
Merci. Juste pour me permettre d'abord de faire un petit point que il y a eu, à part la déclaration, il y a eu un ensemble de mécanismes relatifs aux droits des peuples autochtones qui ont été mis en place pour faciliter un peu les discussions, parce que c'est vrai, les peuples autochtones depuis un certain temps ont été considérés toujours un peuple aéré, justement. C'est l'expression qu'on utilise la plupart du temps. C'est les peuples qui sont réfractaires au développement, qui ne veulent pas en fait la question. Mais qu'est-ce qu'on appelle développement pour un peuple autochtone? C'est ça aussi, parce que quand vous parlez des questions de savoir traditionnel et tout ça, au départ, on ne pensait pas que ces savoirs traditionnels étaient utiles aujourd'hui, mais on sent qu'aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, au niveau du système des Nations Unies, il y a une ouverture. Il y a la création de la plateforme qu'on appelle plateforme des peuples autochtones, des communautés locales et des peuples autochtones. Et cette plateforme est créée dans le sens, en fait, de prendre en compte les savoirs traditionnels. Elle permet aux populations locales et aux peuples autochtones de pouvoir participer à la question de prise de décision, dans la question même de l'environnement, la protection de l'environnement, dans la question de la biodiversité. Donc, il y a ces discussions qui se font à Bonn, où les peuples autochtones sont impliqués dans les discussions. Il y a les discussions qui se font à la COP. Et c'est là aussi il y a des discussions sur les savoirs traditionnels. Et les peuples autochtones participent pleinement à ces discussions aujourd'hui. Il y a même ce qu'on a créé, ce qu'on appelle le caucus. Caucus autochtone, ça permet aux peuples autochtones de discuter entre eux et de proposer des recommandations aux États. C'est ça qui est intéressant aujourd'hui.
Et à l'UNESCO?
Excellent. Pour ce qui est de l'UNESCO, nous sommes dans l'année, ce qu'on appelle l'année de la langue autochtone. Ce n'est pas pour rien que l'UNESCO a pris cette décision aujourd'hui de prendre en compte la réalité de la langue autochtone, parce que c'est la langue, permettez-moi de dire une chose, que les langues autochtones sont des langues qui sont en train de disparaître. Et on sait, chaque année, il y a des langues qui disparaissent.
Et la disparition d'une langue, c'est la disparition d'un savoir.
D'un savoir. Et de toute la culture même de ce peuple-là. Donc, de plus en plus, le système des Nations Unies a mis en place l'année de la langue autochtone et ensuite la décennie de la langue autochtone qui va permettre à ce qu'il y ait des discussions dans la langue autochtone et de pouvoir, puisque la plupart du temps, il est facile de conserver les savoirs dans la langue d'originalité. C'est ça qui est important. Parce que dès qu'on traduit en français, il y a des fois certains mots qui ne sont pas aussi traduits. C'est difficile à traduire.
Un écart.
Il y a un écart par rapport à ça.
Et en même temps, je trouve qu'il y a, parce qu'on a dit, cette savoir autochtone est contre l'innovation, peut-être, il est traditionnel, etc. Mais peut-être il faut dire qu'ils sont très innovatifs. Parce que maintenant, on trouve des nouveaux mots sur partage, coworking, etc. C'est ridicule parce que c'est des pratiques qui sont au cœur de vivre ensemble. Aussi, on recule sur la surexploitation de la relation avec les ressources qui étaient inscrites dans une logique multigénérationnelle. Donc, est-ce qu'il faut presque travailler aussi, pas dire que c'est un savoir traditionnel, c'est un savoir innovatif,
d'avant-garde.
Et qui fait que l'innovation, on approprie ce mot innovation en disant que l'autre logique, elle n'est pas du tout innovative, elle est contre-productive et c'est un contre-développement. Parce que souvent, on exclut ces populations à un droit au développement parce qu'on dit c'est traditionnel.
Je vais juste donner un petit exemple de ce que WIPO est en train de faire, disons la propriété intellectuelle en train de faire actuellement sur le savoir traditionnel. Depuis presque quelques années, disons il y a 2 ou 3 ans maintenant, ils ont commencé à initier, ils commencent à recruter parmi les populations autochtones des gens qui sont capables, ils viennent travailler directement au siège ici. C'est une façon en réalité, non seulement de donner une voix aux populations autochtones, mais les permettre d'être dans le système. Parce que quand on est hors du système, c'est difficile d'influencer. Déjà, le fait d'avoir recruté des autochtones à l'intérieur du système des Nations Unies pour participer à la conservation des savoirs traditionnels, c'est quelque chose. En Afrique du Sud, je vous précise que les savoirs traditionnels, de plus en plus, puisque dans le domaine de la médecine, il y a des plantes qui ont été conservées et scientifiquement reconnues que ce sont des savoirs traditionnels de ce peuple-là. C'est une obligation des États de noter ça. Si vous avez fait des découvertes, vous avez utilisé les populations autochtones, les utiliser pour se soigner, pour plusieurs raisons. Si vous les utilisez, il faut reconnaître.
Alors ce serait bien que les compagnies pharmaceutiques qui vont exploiter tout Madagascar, par exemple, reconnaissent aussi ces savoirs.
Écoutez, c'est l'idéal qui est en train de se faire actuellement autour des mécanismes que les Nations Unies ont mis en place. Vous savez, vous prenez par exemple le Forum sur les entreprises et les droits de l'homme. C'est un cadre idéal pour discuter avec les grandes compagnies, que ce soit les compagnies pharmaceutiques, que ce soit les compagnies minières ou qui exploitent les huiles qu'on a aujourd'hui, les huiles de palme, c'est dans les forêts qu'on a. Donc, juste dire qu'il y a des cadres qui sont en train d'être mis en place pour permettre à ce que ces compagnies reconnaissent la validité de ce savoir autochtone dans leurs décisions, qu'ils prennent en compte, qu'ils reconnaissent ces populations, les savoirs, qu'ils reconnaissent le savoir de ces populations de façon scientifique et le certifier aussi, c'est ça.
Le seul danger peut-être, et je pense que c'est une des luttes aussi sur lesquelles vous agissez, qu'il y a encore un danger d'instrumentalisation pour des intérêts économiques, qu'on s'approprie ce savoir, mais en privé. Et on capitalise, mais pour des intérêts individuels et pas pour des intérêts des collectivités. Et dans ça, je m'arrête tout de suite, parce que c'était beaucoup discuté dans la section de studio de Johannesburg. C'était la relation entre les droits civiques et la hiérarchie, surtout les droits civiques et les droits économiques.
J'en profite pour justement dire qu'il est tout à fait possible de réécouter sur podcast ces discussions. Celle qui était très tôt ce matin en Afrique du Sud vaut véritablement le coup parce que c'est une analyse de la compagnie Total dans ces territoires et les destructions que génère une compagnie internationale dans ces culture autochtone.
Juste encore quelque chose qui est intéressant on a vu avec le Canada, qui a beaucoup de compagnies que vous savez un peu partout dans le monde. Ils ont une politique très bien pointue. Et le Canada a un certain montant de financement pour les entreprises hors du Canada, mais une politique aussi assez accentuée où, lorsque une entreprise canadienne commet viole les questions des droits de l'homme dans un territoire donné, du coup, le Canada coupe son financement, sa subvention à cette entreprise-là. Donc, je pense que si d'autres États entament la voie, ça va ralentir les questions de violation des droits de l'homme dans certains territoires. Et il y a eu un exemple où des communautés autochtones, des populations autochtones au niveau de l'Inde avaient porté plainte sur une entreprise canadienne, mais l'entreprise canadienne a été obligée d'arrêter le travail. Et c'est ce qui s'est passé avec la montagne d'or.
Je ne suis pas sûr qu'on arrivera à arrêter Elon Musk, mais bon.
Mais ce qu'on voit et ce qui est, je pense, très important, c'est l'esprit de force positive que vous portez aussi dans ces luttes qui ne sont pas des luttes faciles. Et cet optimisme est extrêmement important pour encourager aussi tous ceux qui sont dans des moments, et je pense que vous avez vu ces moments aussi, des moments de déception en face de la violence, mais de partager au même temps les soucis, mais partager aussi les réussites. Et parfois, on oublie parce qu'on est fatigué. Et je pense que c'est très important. Je me permets, malheureusement, on a si peu de temps, mais de connecter peut-être les discussions parce que je pense qu'il y a des questions partagées. So I will switch in English. I don't know if you need translation, then you could. Okay. I'm very happy that Antea Taderera is with us here today, and that we will speak of one topic, but I think which is the question of women's rights and reproductive rights, and I think when we discussed a little bit in forefront, the word intersectionality, and even if it's complex and we have to find maybe other words for this, it's so important.
I'm not sure it's so. I will say it before. I'm not sure it's so complex. In this struggles of Paris hotels, this was absolutely in the
intersectionality.
center.
So, we learned more complex words, I guess. But I give the word to Antea, maybe to start first to say if for you the Universal Declaration serves in your struggles, and how you deal with what is not serving to you I have the impression in the same productive way as we just heard from Antine.
I mean, you might regret giving me the mic, but thank you for having me. On the question of the utility of the UDHR, I think for me, I see a lot of parallels with the question of the utility of the multilateral system in itself. And I think the UDHR is a good example of how a flawed document and a flawed process can still in some ways be useful as a tool when we're thinking about how to advance our social justice aims. And for the moment, I guess the most obvious example with the UDHR is the fact that when people were agreeing and adopting this declaration, colonialism was very alive and kicking, and states didn't feel any contradictions in their positions. We see also the continued embeddedness of racism in the instruments and how they're used and in the system. And so there's the eternal question of how do you make something that was created without you in mind, that was created with dehumanizing reasoning. How can we find something out of it that is still useful and that can be fit to purpose in that way? So I think there's a question of strategy, of how to be strategic with what we have and how to leverage it without needing to cleanse the document or cleanse the system, right? So not needing to make it seem as though the UDHR and its aspirations were inherently perfect and everything that we needed was covered, or in the same way the multilateral system is in any way perfect or any of those kinds of things. But there's the questions for us continuously about what does it mean to be present in this space? What does it mean to use this space? And how do we also avoid cooptation? So already jumping onto this question of intersectionality, I agree that it is not complex, but it is conveniently co-opted and contorted. And very often in the UN system and in the language, it's reduced to a list of identities, right? So what is supposed to be an analysis of power, of systems of oppression, we're supposed to be looking at capitalism or racism or patriarchy, all of these things, is reduced to poor, woman, Black, all of these types of things, thereby problematizing the identity and not the systems of oppression that attribute negative readings, that attribute subordination, that attribute discrimination to this particular identity. And so in the UN space, and I think in other places that are trying to co-opt the language but appear progressive, we see a mischaracterization of the problem, right? It's used to obscure what the problem is. And so it's made to seem as though the problem is my racial identity, the fact that I am Black, for example, or perhaps it's a sexual identity problem, the fact that you are queer, or it's a gender identity, or it's a gender problem, you're a woman or you're trans or whatever it is, as opposed to the problem of patriarchy, the problems of heterosexism and homophobia, the problems of racism, the problems of capitalism, right? But if I can put the blame on you, if I can say, Anthea, you're not trying hard enough to be free, that means that states don't have to fix it. They don't have to actively take steps to dismantle the power that they hold, to interrogate the role that they have in the subordination of peoples, and they get to bypass the things that they must actively be doing, for example, to ensure the decolonization, right? To ensure that peoples have rights. And they get to make it a personal problem, like, an individual person is sexist, and good luck fixing it. And so for us, part of our work is to continue to say that these rights that we want are embedded in a material context, right? They're embedded, they live in people, they live in context, they live in a geopolitical context, and we cannot separate them out. We must address all of these things, which includes for us, because we work on sexual rights, this idea that the only way we will really enjoy our sexual rights, the only way I will be free of patriarchy, is actually if I address all of those systems of oppression, because I can only enjoy the sexual rights in a condition of collective liberation, right? And in that way, we annoy everybody. So the global north states who like to really individualize rights, who wants to separate, like they don't like the concept of a collective right, they'd rather pass out than think it's a real thing. They don't want to talk about right to development collectively. They don't want to talk about the right to self-determination, for example. So they hate us because they'd rather think about rights, like sexual rights, like a hanging uterus, you know, it's like disembodied, not belonging to anyone. And in the same way, conservative actors also don't like us because we challenge the idea that there is a homogenous society that is inherently oppressive, right? But as an African woman, I know that there's nothing inherently oppressive about the place that I am from. It's very convenient for the government, however, to make it seem as though there is.
Yeah, I think that a lot of things we could directly go into. We had during this night activists who, in front of those who are in the concepts, are very consequent. But if you are in the field, if you are in the fight, you often confronted by contextual action, because you are in a system of oppression. So sometimes you are radical and solidary, but in the next hour, you bring your kid to, I don't know, to a school which is completely inscribed in a colonial way of teaching. So I think for our actions, we have to deal with this ambivalence in the fights. Maybe you can say something around that.
I mean, I think there is no perfect moral political actor, right? I don't think there is one perfect feminist that I can hold up and be like, you are doing excellent feminism, right? But I think some of the solutions or some of the ways in which we can avoid, even as we are imbued in the systems, avoid being co-opted by them, is some of the classic things that leftists, that feminists have been talking about for a while, which is around the consciousness raising, which is around ensuring that we are collectively participating in critical thought. We're collectively participating in building collective space, right? Retaining that knowledge and the information about how to exist collectively, about what we think of as good, about our political priorities, and to mold those systems even as we're within them, right? So just because your child has to go to a particular school system doesn't mean at the PTA meetings you can't have questions, or you can't have suggestions, or you can't take hold of some part and, you know, be like, I don't know, after school, we're going to invest in the arts, for example, so everybody can enjoy their cultural rights, right? And I think that there is a way in which, as progressive actors, we can become so resigned to oppression, we're not going to try. We think that if we can't have a perfect action, we should just roll over and it's finished. But I think in every aspect of our lives, there's an opportunity to try and take a step forward or to say something.
Interesting is in one discussion, the paragraph 16 was criticized because there is a family concept, which is a very traditional one, and which is, as you said, was embedded in the context of those who wrote the convention and in the time. How do you deal with paragraphs like that?
So I think for me, so in case somebody's not familiar, it's the paragraph that talks about the role of the family and as a fundamental unit. And in some ways, the conservative actors within the multilateral space have interpreted this thing as like the protection of the family, which is not quite what the article says. But for me, the actual key entry point is about whether or not we are saying there is something inherently problematic with people having families, right? Like, what is the contention when representing something as conservatively or as progressive? So in the way that this thing has propped up in the UN as protection of the family, it is very clearly trying to enforce a particular kind of conservative agenda, an agenda that restricts women's rights outside the home, an agenda that proposes that children are private property and don't themselves have rights, all of these kinds of things. But that is not inherently the fate of the article. We could progressively interpret it and pull it back, right? We could have conversations about how to recognize the different kinds of families that exist. These could be families that are non-heteronormative, but also could just be extended families. How do we ensure, for example, that extended families are included in how we think about migration and have migration-related protections, or have social protections in terms of the way in which we access pensions, or the ways in which we access insurance, or whatever it is. But what we are seeing instead in the space, from my vantage point, is the willingness to cede any right that has been interpreted conservatively to conservative actors. And I think that's a mistake, right? If they have pulled something and they're pushing a particular ideology, we must push back on that ideology and refuse, right? Because the more we allow them to frame the entire conversation, the harder and harder it becomes to propose an alternative, right? And if the conversation is getting difficult, we must just be willing to dig our feet in, right? And what instead we see, certainly with some other progressive, some of our allies in the space, is almost a refusal to engage on the content, and instead wanting to engage on the actor, right? A focus on the fact that the actor is conservative, the fact that they're saying something conservative as we knew that they would. It's kind of predictable. You kind of know what people's positions are, and an unwillingness to really interrogate the content, right? And to say, what do we want? Because many of us, I have a family, I come from a family. What do I understand by that? What are the kind of protections I want to ensure that they have, that other people in their families, however they have recognized them, have? And how do we bring those kinds of things to fruition?
Maybe because you pointed out that it's so important to interconnect the fights also transnational, and I think we on one hand speak about international, transnational, but when we really speak about these logic, the states coming up and not nations, and I think this is connected to conventions. So that means I'm adhering to a confession or to a constitution, and not to a territory, but not in that sense to rely to the territory, but to have a kind of exclusive right on territory. So what is the interconnection of these fight in different contexts, and how you deal with your agenda on this?
So for the SRI, we ourselves are a coalition. We're a North-South feminist coalition. We try to think about even what Global South leadership means for that, as we think about sexual rights in the broadest possible sense. So our current series, for example, has been on the political economy of sexual rights. So we're really trying to think about what is necessary and what is required, and how we can do transnational solidarity will always come up as part of that, because of our differing positionalities. I think our biggest insight, which I think is the insight of all anyone who organizes, is that you cannot do it by yourself, right? You really, 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 really require political alliances. So my work might be based in the UPR or supporting the Human Rights Council, whatever it is in Geneva, but it is very important to also be in conversation with people who are organizing regionally, people who are organizing nationally, and to just separate the work, right? To just split it. It's just too much to do by ourselves. So just in the burden of work, there's that. And then there's also the question of legitimacy and what kind of things we are bringing into the space. And for us, it's very important to be able to speak to activists and advocates in different spaces, because then we get a better sense of what the demands are, what we are asking for, right? So what I might be asking for as Anthea with my experiences and my personal political agenda, but also what are some of the things that are coming out in other spaces, so that we can think about what is useful for states in a multilateral sense to say something about.
And how can we intersectional these topics.
Exactly. And how can we be intersectional about how we're approaching them, but also in terms about our responsibilities, right? And so one of the conversations we've been having in our coalition, because we have a member in Canada, is how part of their obligations is to chase down the Canadian government for their nonsense positions, right? That is your part in this coalition, is to ensure that you are pursuing the countries that might position themselves as progressive in sexual rights and asking them, for example, about the rights of Indigenous people or about, extractives, about all of these things. And that is their contribution actually to sexual rights, because we are trying to actively dismantle all of the things that are meaning that people can't enjoy them. And so being able to have a conversation about differentiated responsibility even among civil society is very important, right? So we don't necessarily need everybody to be saying the same thing. We need people to also be targeting where they are most influential.
But who are on her topic, but open for the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for us, it also means being in solidarity when actually we don't know very much on the topic, but we have a sense of this is the right thing. I might not have the technical experience of being able to articulate why it is, but what it's meant practically for us sometimes is we will go and sit in or participate in negotiations on resolutions on stuff that are outside of sexual rights, narrowly defined, because we know it is important for other movements. We know it's important for states to know that there's somebody watching them.
I think that's a very important. You wanted to say something to that, Antine?
Permettez-moi de parler en français. Ok, je suis désolé. Juste quelque chose qui est très captif qu'elle a touché, qui est très bien, parce que elle a parlé des droits collectifs, dont beaucoup d'États ne veulent pas entendre, et c'est vraiment particulier par rapport à ça. Et c'est le problème pour les peuples autochtones. La plupart des États sont beaucoup conservatifs parce qu'ils ne veulent pas qu'on parle des droits collectifs. Et elle a parlé de la question de l'autodétermination. Parce que c'est vraiment des choses qui permettent au peuple autochtone d'avoir, puisque nous, en tant qu'autochtones, on ne pense pas à la question de l'individualité, mais c'est la question du groupe. Le groupe survit comment? Le groupe va faire quoi? Je ne fais pas quelque chose à mon nom propre, mais je le fais au nom du groupe. Et c'est ce qui pose problème. C'est ça, la plupart des États ne veulent pas du tout. Et ça fait que plusieurs États ne veulent pas reconnaître les peuples autochtones dans les territoires. Au regard de cette question du droit collectif. C'est ça.
Et je pense dans ce logique-là, ce que vous les deux, what you both have said is about also solidarity and a kind of strategic pragmatism, which is not ignoring reflection, but which says I'm standing next to you because I trust you and I can correct. And often we are not allowing ourselves in the fights if we are not really, and this is not about, it's a false thought about responsibility to all understand all the fight of the others. You still can be solidary. And this is precisely what you said. This is the collective action which they are so afraid of, and why we see so much agency on division and dividing movements.
And I bring it a little bit in design and in creation. This we name interdisciplinarity. This means we think together at one level and we work speciality in another level. And this two dimensions, I think it's very, very important.
I would love to continue, but we have a third person who's not here, but she is still, there's an interview made with her. It's Ana Maria Suarez Franco from the FIAN movement, which is a Food First Information and Action Network. And I think this is also interesting. Often we don't say the acronyms or the reality behind, but about information and action. And I think these are two forms of action. And I'm curious what Anna Maria will say to us in this round about promote new rights. So we will see the film.
Hello there, Anna Maria. Thanks a lot to be with us for this third night of social rights. I think you already participated in the previous edition 1 year ago. So please, could you first present yourself and explain the work carried out by your organization on human rights, and yes, and the work you are doing in this organization, FIAN International, please.
Thank you very much, Jan, and all the organizers. It's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Ana Maria Suarez Franco. I am a Colombian human rights defender, on the background and an advocate, a lawyer, and I work with FIAN as permanent representative in Geneva. FIAN International is the organization working for the promotion and defense of the human rights to food and related rights. And departing from this work, we are active in many relevant issues for human rights, different debates and processes, both at the national level through our more than 20 sections, but also at the regional levels and here in Geneva, especially through the work of our international secretariat. FIAN stands for the right to food, and its main aim is to correct power imbalances in a world which is full with inequalities that are increasing. And we have an anti-colonial and anti-oppressive approach. And therefore, we work very close to social movements, especially the rural movements, but also affected communities to support their struggles with the human rights. We have sections, as I said, in over 20 countries, but we are not so big, and we work a lot with networks, including, for example, the Global Network on the Right to Food and Nutrition, the Consortium on Extraterritorial Obligations, the Global Campaign, Treaty Alliance, and others at the regional and national level. And through this work, we are present in more than 60 countries. Our General Secretariat is in Heidelberg, but we also have people in Rome, in Brussels, and in Geneva. And one of the last initiatives we have been supporting, which is our campaign for these 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is the work on the Maastricht Principles on the human rights of future generations, on which we will be speaking soon.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria. Maybe a first question. Could you maybe explain us from the point of view of your political commitment and your work experience, what is for you the relevance of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights to today?
Yeah, I think the Universal Human Rights, which has been adopted 75 years ago, is still very important for the different challenges that our humanity is facing, taking into account also that even if on the time it was adopted, it was a voluntary instrument, now it is part of customary law, which means it is binding because there is a state praxis and an opinion juris. The states recognize that this is obligatory, and it sets the minimum obligations that states have under human rights, also recognized that people that have been traditionally marginalized and disadvantaged and are not only recipients of charity, but that they are right holders and can have agency. And this is very important in the move towards an anti-colonial world. I think also that the declaration has been very important soil for a fertile development in an evolving human rights body of law that includes both all the hard law, the 9 conventions on human rights, but also many soft law instruments that are, or standards that are very helpful to confront the injustice and inequalities and the crisis of our times, including especially the social rights. And the declaration also sets principles for a world in which human dignity is the main value. Of course, this concept has to be updated, and one couldn't say that human dignity is only focused on the human beings, but nowadays it's very clear that it should include the intrinsic connection that humans have with the nature on which we depend on to continue our lives.
Thanks for your work on this. And I have a question. Maybe you talk about the rights of future generation. How do you think we can build on the UDHR and the already existing international law instruments to build some kind of new rights? And maybe the rights of future generation can be an example. You can maybe develop on that, and maybe you have other ideas on this question.
Yeah, maybe this is the question on which I will speak the most, because it's very interesting to remember that while the declaration is a minimal agreement, during its preparatory works, many seeds were planted for upcoming developments in international human rights law that are needed to respond to the challenges of our societies living in a multi-crisis situation. And in this framework, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights can provide legal solutions. We know legal solutions are not the only solutions, but are part of those that can be developed to respond to the needed situations and challenges, as I said. And some examples of new rights that have been recognized are, for example, the right to water, the right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment, also women's rights, the rights of indigenous peoples, and peasants' rights, between many others, which shows that the declaration can be the seed to very important plans. On the human rights of future generations, it's important to take into account that while they were mentioned in the preparatory works of the declaration, they were not included into this. Nonetheless, the declaration does not include geographical or time limits. That's why many years ago, we began working on the extraterritorial obligations of the states, which means that states do not have their human rights obligations only within their territory, but also beyond it, beyond their borders. And now, with a very interesting group of expert social movement practitioners, we have been working on the rights of future generations, which depart from the basis that the declaration does not include a temporal limitation. The idea of the human rights of future generations is to confront the huge risks that our humanity is confronting, including mass destruction weapons, new emerging technologies like the artificial intelligence or genetic modification, the triple planetary crisis, which is climate change, the pollution and the destruction of our biodiversity, the food crises, and others. Taking into account that our humanity lives in a continuum, and that the decisions that are taken today can have an impact in the middle and in the long term, and also stating that business as usual have to change if we want a dignified future for the humanity and for our planet. It's very important to say that these principles which were adopted between the 1st and 3rd of February, after a 6 years process with many consultations, with movements, with work of experts from different regions, including a drafting group with representatives from each one of the 5 regions that are represented in the UN. These principles include a clear message on the need to rethink our production and consumption models that nowadays are based at the cost of nature and the people, and the need of changing injustice patterns, including gender injustice. The clear message of the principles is that if we do not change the course of the dominant economic and political models, we will continue sacrificing both present generations, especially the most marginalized and disadvantaged groups, but we will also put in danger the possibility of future people, of those who do not exist now, to enjoy their human rights. So therefore, we identified the need to interpret human rights in a way that allows that the needed transitions are based on human rights agreed by states 75 years ago, but looking into the future. Since the declaration does not have time limits, it was very important for the work in defining the human rights of future generations to go deep into practices that already exist, on laws, on jurisprudence, and in the beliefs and different cultures that already take their decisions thinking on the impacts many generations ahead, to ensure mainly intra and intergenerational justice in governance decision making, and not only thinking in the benefits that some decisions could have in the very short term, but also the costs that they could have in the future. And one example is the one of extractive economies, which in many cases could generate some profit for some groups today, but could have a very, very high cost for those who are not alive now. So that's why we initiated this process towards the Maastricht Principles on the Right of Future Generations. These principles define what are future generations. They provide very clear principles that should be applied in this decision-making in the present, having impacts in the future, like, for example, the intra and intergenerational justice, the precautionary principle, trusteeship, gender, and others. They also clarify states and non-state actors' obligations and provide examples of violations of the human rights of future generations, as well as give clear guidance on how the representatives of future generations could be appointed in different governance bodies, from local councils until the UN, especially looking on the need of diversity. And these principles also set very clear that if we do not correct the present injustices and the past injustices that we inherited from colonialism and slavery, we will not be able to change the course and ensure human rights for future generations. They learn a lot from indigenous peoples and highlight their contribution of peasants to the current food systems and to the needed changes to confront the planetary crisis. And these principles are really relevant at the moment because the Secretary General has announced the Summit of the Future, in which he speaks mainly about solidarity with future generations, but does not have the human rights approach. So the principles could input with this approach into the debates and in the planned pact for the future. There is also a proposal of a declaration on future generations without the human rights component. So the principles can help in bringing this approach there. And the General Secretariat, in his briefing on the issue, has also proposed a hub and an envoy on future generations, and the principles could help with different elements on who should be in these different bodies. And finally, now we have 3 international courts: the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, the International Court of Justice, and the Inter-American Human Rights Court, preparing advisory opinions on climate change. And we think that the principles on the human rights of future generations bring very important elements for this work. And therefore, we have been preparing inputs into that.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria. So we can all see that you have so excellent knowledge of this UN processes and institutions. And maybe my last question would be more on the work you are doing in the international Geneva spaces. And maybe you have some recommendation or ideas about strategies or tools, or I don't know, to make more effective international Geneva, the civil society, but more generally UN institution in developing, protecting, and promoting human rights, no?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan. And I want to say that all what I am saying is kind of collective knowledge that comes to my mouth, but it's not not only my knowledge. Many people have contributed to all these processes. I have 5 points. I think the first one is that the system has to give more space to the people which this system is supposed to protect and to accompany. And that means ensuring that when different standards are set, when different causes are defended, we have to recognize that people from the field are real experts on their realities, and we see a move in the system of shrinking spaces for civil society. I think it is really important to ensure that this does not continue to happen, and that more spaces are open for the human rights holders, especially those of the marginalized and disadvantaged groups. Then the next, maybe for the general public and not only for the policymakers, is the needed solidarity with the denounces that all those who defend human rights in the system present, especially denounces on structural causes that have our planet as it is now, but also on specific cases. And of course, this is the one part to support the denounces, but we also need big support for proposals of solutions that do not go necessarily in hand with the dominant voices. Then very important is also financial solidarity. I think many of the organizations that work here with a dissenting voice are suffering the reduction of funds, and unfortunately, without money, the work cannot be done. We cannot invite the communities to participate. So financial solidarity to ensure sustainability of the work of the many NGOs that defend human rights is really important, especially, as I said, those with critical positions and narratives. And finally, I think that supporting the implementation of the achievements of the system, as for example, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, is relevant because they reflect also the struggles of the people in the local level, which at the end are the main people we want to support in our struggle against injustice and oppression. And with this, I would finish. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria. It was very good to have this video so that we have you with us for the night on the 10th of December. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
I agree with Jan and say again, thank you to you both, all the three of you. And it was really nice that we came from the autochthon questions to intersectional fights and to the future rights of future generations. And I think with this, I hand over to another topic, which will be in the 23rd hour. Thank you so much, both. And I hand over to Eva about borders and conflicts.
Okay, so we're in the final session before we come to the conclusions, and I'm very, very happy, and I think it's a very important important session given also the situation of the world today. As Vera already said, it's on human rights, borders, and conflicts, and I'm very happy to have here with me in Geneva Jelena Aparak, who's here as an independent researcher, and she will introduce herself further in a minute. And then online, we have Elio Panese of Border Forensics with us, and Erika Harper of the Geneva Academy. So welcome to all of you. And maybe because you're here with me, I would like to start with you and ask you to please present yourself, and also the work that you carry out with regard to the question of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for inviting me. I have experience. So my name is Jelena Aparak, and I have experience as a humanitarian worker. I was a former expert with the UN Working Group on the use of mercenaries, and I currently hold a position with the NGO that brings legal strategic litigation for victims of armed conflicts. I will, however, speak on my own behalf today because I also work on issues such as business and human rights and armed conflicts, and I published on this topic quite extensively. A few publications coming still out. Shall I dig into the business and human rights directly, or shall I?
Yeah, maybe we do that when everyone has introduced herself or himself. So maybe Erika, you could go ahead on just briefly introducing yourself, and then we start discussing.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's all good.
Yep. So my name is Erika Harper. I'm the head of research and policy studies at the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. As the name suggests, we work on international humanitarian law and human rights issues, but some things we're particularly interested in with respect to this topic, we work on climate security, we work on the institutional reform of the peace and security architecture, and particularly the role of the Human Rights Council within that. And then we work on non-state actors, including private military and security actors and non-state armed groups. So I'm going to be talking today. I thought the best thing for me to talk about today was the evolving role of the Human Rights Council within that conflict, peace and security architecture, and how it is evolving to fill some of the gaps that are being left, as we can see in the crises today. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And Elio, maybe you can also continue to introduce yourself, and then maybe also start digging deeper into your work on your experience on the human rights sector, and also maybe describe a bit how the Human Rights Declaration that all this event was all about is influencing your work still today.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me properly? That's good.
Yeah, it's all good.
Thank you. So my name is Elio Panese, and I'm a researcher for the NGO based in Geneva called Border Forensics. So Border Forensics is an NGO that develops and uses spatial and visual research and analysis methods to investigate border violence wherever it materializes. So we work in collaboration with migrant people and non-governmental groups to reconstruct with precision specific cases of human rights violation, while also rendering the tools that we develop and that we use, rendering those tools available so that they can be used by other human rights actors. So in that sense, we aim to provide, on the one hand, an external capacity to civil society actors by conducting investigations in collaboration with them and also at the request of them sometimes, while also strengthening their internal capacity of collecting proofs and applying methods to investigate human rights violation. So in this sense, human rights is really at the core of our practice. And maybe just to develop this a little bit, we can say that border forensics operates at the intersection of 4 different fields. So we have the field of human rights, we have the research, the art and architecture, and we can develop a bit on this also, and technologies. And so each of the activities in this area are mutually reinforcing. And so in our human rights work, we produce evidence of violation using those tools that I mentioned earlier, and different strategies derived from forensic science, architecture, investigative journalism, and NGO practices. And so we also develop different technologies to develop practical tools and know how to understand how acts of violence work and how to appropriate some of these technologies. And research also is really central to our practice because it really enables us to situate those forms of violence that we study in the wider political, social, ethical context and the different social, historical aspects of the border and the state policies and practices. And finally, arts and architecture-based strategies really provides us with crucial means of visual and spatial analysis, as well as the language needed to think critically about the aesthetics of our findings in order to communicate them to a wider public. In this sense, we develop reports, but also visualization that are used in legal, national and international courts, but also more broadly in cultural events or political assemblies in order to also raise awareness and render visible the forms of violence that we study. And so at the same time, it's good to mention that human rights, as I said, is at the core of our practice, but also our work really takes its roots in a broader historical moment and approach in human rights practice that some have described, for example, as Eyal Weizman has described as the forensic turn in human rights practice. So in the sense, this emerging sensitivity to material investigation traces and this continuous shift from human rights practice mainly focused on victims' testimonies to one that also mobilizes an extremely wide range of material evidence to present them in legal forum to hold actors accountable for their actions. And so in general, we also really think critically about this human rights practice, human rights approach, because not only on the data we use and the tools that we develop, but also this forensic turn can also be quite problematic in the sense that it's also related to the fragility and the sometimes discredited testimony of victim. And so we also, while developing tools to analyze material evidence, we also put at the center of our practice the victim's testimony to ensure that their voices is not only heard but also heard and put at the center of the investigations as well.
Thanks a lot, Elio. And I already noted down some of the aspects that you mentioned that we should then later on continue to discuss further, maybe. But Erica, could you please dig a bit deeper into your work, like particularly the one on the peace and security architecture, your findings with regard to the Human Rights Council? Could you just elaborate a bit more on that, please?
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about some research that we've been doing in collaboration with the United Nations University and the Human Rights Council. And it's really been, unpacking and examining the evolving role of human rights in conflict prevention, early warning, and mitigation. So is it okay if I talk for about kind of 7-ish minutes, and I'll just kind of present where we are with the research, and then I can answer some questions? Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit and give a bit of context on the traditional architecture as a whole, what it can do, what it can't, how it's changing, and then kind of look at how actors like the Human Rights Council might fit into this. That's kind of the remit of the research. Current context, that's obviously incredibly difficult to ignore. And while we've had complaints about the Security Council and its responsibility for decades, the system seems to be operating with, particular ineffectiveness at the moment. 18 months ago, we saw one member state invade, its neighbour Ukraine, and because that member is part of the Permanent Five, the tools at the council's disposal, they've been rendered fairly useless. And the situation is also interesting because it demonstrates that the veto isn't the only problem. So these geopolitical divisions, they run really deep and they carry over to the General Assembly. Its strongest act has arguably been suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council. And look, even then, the sponsors of the resolution, they had to work really hard, like harder than they expected, to get those 2/3 votes needed. Events in Gaza, they can likewise be looked at as a failure of the international peace and security architecture. There's no justifying of Hamas's acts, but the situation also needs to be viewed in context. So, Gaza's been occupied since 1967. There's been a land, sea, air blockade since 2007. There have been settlements built. This has all been in contravention of international law. This was the 5th largest military offensive in 15 years. I lived in the Middle East for 2 of those. And these are all key drivers of instability and conflict in the region. And despite all of this, again, we see that the Security Council has struggled to take on, the violations that are, even completely uncontested from a legal perspective. And again, this is largely because of one member state exercising its veto. So, geopolitical divisions, especially among the P5, is a major issue in how we look at the architecture today. The council was set up at a different time, responding to a certain set of logic and events that, no longer speak to representativeness by any standard. But look, changing this is going to be tough. The power that would have to be given up, it's just too great. At the same time, lamenting that the peace and security architecture is completely broken, is probably an overstatement. It's certainly not constructive. So one thing we need to acknowledge is that, against all these struggles, there are still and will continue to be issues that the council can come together on. Its response to the Islamic State group is a good example. So in the 3 years that the group was most active, the council operated kind of pretty much as we would have wanted it to. Passed about 12 resolutions. The High Commissioner on Human Rights was able to brief members in formal session. Findings from the OHCHR investigatory mission, they were incorporated into subsequent resolutions. Now, of course, what allowed this was context. It was a shared threat to the international community without any vested member state involvement. But this doesn't, this doesn't make what it did do any less valuable. And if we look forward, especially given the risks that are, posed by artificial intelligence and climate change, threats of a similar nature may become more frequent. So we still need the council. Another point that came out of the research that we need to acknowledge is that the system as a whole is not static. So it has component parts that are evolving and reconfiguring themselves to deal with blockages, to debate and to action. And this is possible because while the council might have primary responsibility for peace and security, it's not solely responsible. And this is where the role of the HRC becomes interesting. And if we kind of look at this historically, we can see that, this maneuvering is the outcome of kind of a decades-long process of contestation and adjustment where every so often the lines of responsibility between the council and the Human Rights Council and other organs have become a little bit more dispersed. So one of those most important moments was probably in 1950 with Resolution 377, what we talk about as Uniting for Peace now. It fell shy of authorising the General Assembly to take forceful measures, but it did make clear that the power of the council is not inviolable. The last 10 years, we can see this other evolution. So in this growing willingness of the Human Rights Council to step into this space. It may not be a peace and security actor, but it can undertake peace and security kind of esque actions. We've seen this in its creation of country-specific special rapporteur. It also is increasingly mandating investigatory mechanisms. And while neither of these involve the use of force, we shouldn't underestimate them. So in a conflict theatre, I think any fact-gathering process, it confers a message that at some point in the future, perpetrators of IHL or IHRL may be brought to account. And in really complicated situations like Ukraine, this may be the only tool which we have as an international community to influence belligerency in a real-time manner. So if we step back, I think rather than a completely broken and stagnant system, it might be more constructive to understand today's peace and security architecture as moving, as chameleon. It has the capacity to take different forms at different moments. So when conditions are right, the council can act swiftly but purposefully, and we will need it to do so in the future. But when politics kind of brings that system to a halt, we can see other organs creatively using their flexibility and their competency to bridge gaps. It's not perfect. The Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, they're of course not immune from blockages, and their toolkit is more limited, but it's also not all bad. So given that the one kind of consistent thing about conflicts is that they have political dimensions, a playing field that's got multiple stakeholders, each bearing different tools and working methods, it means that we have greater scope for dealing with threats. And this is really important. What it may be that, the best way to encourage the Permanent Five at the Security Council to get serious about reform that's actionable and that's fair is to gently signal back to them that unless they do, new players like the HRC are going to come in and fill those voids. In terms of what we can do now to kind of support the Human Rights Council and the notion of human rights as a peace and security prevention mechanism, we set out a number of recommendations in our research, and anyone who's interested can go on the Geneva Academy website and download it. I think the most important that we wanted to reiterate is understanding how to support this evolving context without derailing it or interrupting it. So, for example, I mentioned this really steep increase in Human Rights Council mandated investigations and their potential utility, especially when all other avenues are blocked. But we really don't know a lot about how these work in granular terms, especially how and in what contexts and taking what forms these investigations might serve a prevention function, prevention of human rights violations, prevention of conflict escalation. So we need more research here to kind of find out what particular elements we need to be strengthening. A second point is that discussions around reforming the peace and security architecture, they really need to incorporate these evolutions and these new players. So one reform proposal that's recently resurfaced is around a code of conduct whereby permanent members of the Security Council would not use their veto in situations where there was credible evidence of IHL or large-scale human rights violations. The time wasn't right for this to get traction in 2015 when it was first proposed. It's certainly not the right time now, but it is a sound proposition, and we could consider variations on this, like such instances triggering a debate, an emergency debate at the Human Rights Council. Last point I'll say is that we need to support positive steps forward. And in doing that, we really need to learn from the past. So pushing for too much in terms of new players and their capabilities too soon, it can backfire. This is the lesson that we have to learn from the way that responsibility to protect R2P was invoked in Libya. You know, many member states are highly uncomfortable with particularly the Human Rights Council getting involved in peace and security matters. And some of this reasoning is valid. So the path needs to be navigated carefully, and boundaries, especially anything that could be construed as a pretext for interfering in domestic affairs unnecessarily, needs not to be overstepped. So that's basically where our research stands at the moment, and where we're going into a next phase in 2024, and happy to answer any questions on the paper or on this, what the next phase of our research might look like. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Erica. And we will dig deeper into it afterwards, but I would like to give Elena the chance now to explore more of her work on business and human rights and conflict. And yeah, I'm very curious to find out about it.
Thank you. Actually, the times are really very striking to demonstrate how much do we actually need to look more into the substance of what we can do in terms of accountability and holding companies responsible for their actions, not just in armed conflict, but as the title of this workshop rightly points, also on the border management and migration. And I'll come to later to that, maybe to connect the first to intervention, because I think it's a very interesting point, in particular if you focus on the role of companies. But yes, the question of wars and economy dates from prehistorical times. It's not something that is new. We have the issue of companies being involved and to some extent hold accountable during the first war tribunals since Nuremberg trials in the UN system. So the political process also dates since the 1970s and the first Cassese report for the role of companies in the Chile dictatorship, and it has been very active ever since. So there is a conscience from both human rights policy and international criminal law perspective, the need to look into the roles of companies and to hold them actually to accountable. We are failing more today than a few decades ago, if I may say so. And we are failing for several reasons. Companies are being increasingly multinational in their forms. They are increasingly participating in the processes. And we have a system today that is very contradictory in itself. What does it mean concretely? It means that international public law is very much state-centric. So we say states are the only ones who have obligations under international law. Companies cannot have obligations under international law, therefore they could not be held accountable. And yet we find ourselves before European Court of Human Rights, where companies that are not human can initiate proceedings to have their human rights being defended, while at the same time, before the same court, individuals cannot come and claim their human rights being protected against those same companies. That is one of the paradoxes. At the same time, we say companies don't have responsibility under international because they don't have international obligations, and we cannot state cannot turn against companies. But we have proceedings before International Investment Center, Center for Investment Disputes, where companies can go against states. And very often, multinational companies go very often against small states that are economically very unfavorable. So we live in a system of paradoxes where those companies have more and more power. They have more and more access to policy-making decisions. They have more and more access to accountability to defend their rights, whether in the economic system or now a human rights system. And yet there is still nothing that can be used in the system to hold them accountable. This is true and this is false at the same time, because international law can actually hold them accountable if there would be more will to do so. And specifically, International Criminal Court can prosecute corporate directors. There have been quite a lot of communications under Article 15 of the Rome Statute to initiate and to trigger those proceedings. And to this day, this has never happened. Even at the beginning of the International Criminal Court, one of the first press releases of the very first prosecutor relating to the situation in Congo was to say, we are going to look into potentially prosecute white-collar crime, meaning role of corporations in the situation of Congo that we know is very much related and stimulated by economic interest of various companies, but it has never happened to this day. So the system itself, not just from the peace and security structure, but from the accountability structure as well, needs to be rethink, and it needs to be rethink in a way that has a more equal approach, not to defend, as it does now, Western and powerful states, but to have more equilibrium, more equal approach to give power and voices to the states from the what we call global South today, and this is a growing interest also from the global South countries themselves.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, maybe we go back to Elio for a while, and yeah, I've heard a lot about the way you try to make your findings visible, also in order to mobilize people, to represent people. So maybe you can talk a bit about the instruments, a bit more about the instruments that you use in order to overcome the current situations of human rights abuses. Also, maybe with regard to obstacles in general that are there in terms of holding states accountable for their human rights obligations.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe so that everything that I said before is maybe a bit clearer as well. Let me give you an overview of our work as well, and for example, the 3 last investigations that we published. So border forensics focus on different border regions of the world. Recently, we published 3 investigations, one on the border, on the situation in the Alps between Italy and France, another situation in the Mediterranean, another one in the Sahel-Sahara region in the borders of Niger. And so the different investigation, the first one we published in May 2022 was the death of Blessing Matthew. Blessing Matthew was a Nigerian woman who tried to cross the Alps from Italy to France. And when she arrived in the French part of the border, she was chased by the French police and ended up falling or being pushed in a river, in the Durance River. And so we developed spatial temporal reconstruction in order to assess the unfolding of the events and located the different events in a 3D environment. And we managed in this situation to show the contradiction of the police testimonies on this case. For this case, we worked in collaboration with the Association Tous Migrants, who tried to reopen the case in the French court because this case was really quickly closed by a French prosecutor. And in this situation, until now, the case was still not reopened for, something we can discuss maybe in detail also later for issues related to the acceptability of proof in different legal settings. Another investigation that we did was on the impact of Frontex surveillance in the Mediterranean and the impact of the Frontex drone surveillance and their role in the interception of boats by the Libyan Coast Guards. And the idea of this investigation was to render visible the invisible drones and to unveil the aerial complicity of Frontex in abuses that are happening in Libya, while accounting for the responsibility that should come with the surveillance capacity of Frontex. And the latest investigation that we published was on the deadly effects of border control in Niger, focusing specifically on the law that was actually abrogated last week, if I'm not mistaken. And so through the development of geostatistical methods, we measured the impact of border control on the changing tracks used by migrants in the Sahara side region. and to monitor the increased risk of dying of dehydration that this entails. And so by using satellite imagery, we documented shifting tracks over time, and to rendered visible the deadly impact of border control. So these different investigations, mainly for the Blessing investigation, were used. The Blessing investigation, for example, the report was used to push for the reopening of a case in the French court. But others were more diffused in different forums. So mainly cultural forums where we develop also exhibitions, and which led also to talks and discussion around those cases and the deadly effects of border control in general. But maybe to answer your question more precisely, it's interesting to focus on an ongoing investigation that we are conducting much closer to Geneva, actually, here in Switzerland. We have been called upon a non-governmental actor, an association in Switzerland, to investigate a case of racist police violence here in Switzerland. Back in 2021, Roger Enzo Willem, a Swiss man of South African descent, was killed by a police officer in Morges train station. So Morges is a town between Geneva and Lausanne. And the investigation on his death was led by the public ministry of the Canton Vaud, and still more than 2 years after his death hasn't arrived to shed light on the exact unfolding of the event. So we undertook a counter investigation on this case, and we already published some preliminary elements of analysis on this case, but our investigation is still ongoing. But here it clearly shows the difficulty to investigate those cases also here in Switzerland, mainly on the one hand, some obstacles regarding the access to different means of proof. For example, it is the public ministry who holds the different proof and who gathered and provide the different means of proof. And what we were able to show is that some means of proof were actually missing in the file report. And at the same time, it also showed the different obstacles and also a continuum of violence that is put on the victims, but also on their families while they're seeking justice. Here, it's good to mention the report on the visit to Switzerland of the working group of experts on people of African descent. They visited Switzerland in 2022 and really pointed out that Switzerland, although Switzerland has ratified all major international human rights treaties, it has a monist tradition. So the major human rights law are implemented in our constitution and legal system. But Switzerland still has a weak legal and practical means to combat racism, discrimination, and to seek justice when human rights violations are violated. And so what we see here is that we try to do with border forensics is try to shed light on the different human rights violations that we are investigating on, and at the same time to overcome the negation of rights and also sometimes the negation of violence that is quite symptomatic of those cases, especially when talking about police violence, especially when those cases are concerning people of African descent. And something, maybe the last thing that is also important to mention here with regard to human rights and also recommendation related to human rights defense in Switzerland, is that although this report and others pointed out the critical lack of legal and practical means to combat, for example, racism, but also human rights violation, Switzerland also has largely ignored the different UN recommendations that were put forward in the different reports. And so it's also the work of Border Forensics, but also many other human rights organizations here in Switzerland to render visible this lack of accountability and to try and put forward for a better practice and better legal and practical framework to combat racial discrimination, to combat human rights violation here in Switzerland.
Thanks a lot, Elio, also for these very concrete examples, which I think help to understand your work better, but also to understand what kind of situation of crisis we are talking about. Erica, maybe you've been talking also about lessons from the past that we should draw. Maybe I could ask you to elaborate a bit more on those lessons that you have already drawn, and also specifically with regard to how human rights could in the future help to better prevent conflicts or situation of crisis, and build more resilience. I'm sure you have some examples to
I mean,
relate
in
to.
terms of lessons from the past, I mean, the main one that keeps seeming to be repeated is again pushing for too much too soon. Again, there are very valid reasons why there is concern about too much informational exchange or cooperation between the security kind of geared organs of the systems and the human rights geared organs of the system. And that's mainly about the politicization of human rights issues, and conversely applying human rights kind of intervention strategies as a means of furthering geopolitically based agendas. So we really need to be careful about that. I think another lesson from the past is that just because an idea didn't work at the time, it doesn't mean we should completely, just put it in the bin and forget about it. Context matters and moments matter, and what was not possible 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, might suddenly be possible again. So moments matters in social sciences, we call them kind of critical junctures. So we need, it's not a very satisfying solution. It doesn't fit really well into a work plan or a log frame, but we need to be quite flexible when we look at peace and security architecture reform and wait for those key moments, and then have a kind of a toolbox of ideas on how we could push the system forward in small but positive ways. In terms of, I think your second question was around the role that human rights could play moving forward in conflict prevention. So when the Human Rights Council was set up, it was against a backdrop of this increasing realization that there were these interconnections and mutually constituting relationship between human rights violations and conflict, and part of how that manifested was looking at the Human Rights Council as having an early warning and a prevention mandate. And I think there's kind of a lot of enthusiasm for this in the system, and the idea, like, it's very logical, this idea that, the Human Rights Council has all of these mechanisms, treaty bodies, special procedures, the Universal Periodic Review, and, so it's got all this capacity to monitor compliance and violations of human rights practice, and this that tracking function, it can monitor where risk factors lies that could spill over into conflict, and because it's got this capacity, it can intervene in a timely manner to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think a lot of that support has kind of yielded to criticism that the Human Rights Council isn't playing that role very effectively, and it's really not a fair comment, because if you kind of unpack the mechanics behind which the Human Rights Council is meant to do this, it goes into kind of, special procedures is a good example. I think we kind of critics might look at, this huge body of reporting and information which is produced by all the country and the thematic mandates, and they kind of think that, if only this could be kind of brought together and synthesized and analyzed, like in there must somehow, somewhere be the key to unlocking prevention. And if we could just get that right, in reality, we have to look at the way that the special procedures has been constructed, and, they're independent experts that are by design able to follow their own agenda, and that means that, and they're resource limited as well. So we're never going to get a comprehensive, granular understanding of how human rights violations might be spilling over into conflict everywhere at all times in all dimensions. It's just not realistic to expect that of the system. So I think we could do a better job, I think, at pooling and synthesizing the information that's collected under special procedures. But, if we really wanted the council to play a prevention role, then we have to enable it to do that. So instead of complaining about why it's not doing it, we have to understand that the system just isn't currently set up. The mechanics of the system isn't set up to produce the kind of information in a granular and timely way that we could react to it. And then we also have to take into account that, look, at the end of the day, the HRC, it's a member state intergovernmental body. Like it or not, these fora will be prone to politicization. It might not be quite as apparent and acute as in some of the other organs, but it is still going to be there. So I think we have to be realistic about what we aim for, and then when we want to aim for something, we have to be willing to put the tools and resources and energy behind it to see it home. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks a lot, Erica. And I like that positive notion that you tend to have in all the criticism of the system as it is right now. I would like to give you, Jelena, the chance to explore a bit more, like about the instruments that there maybe are in place in order to make the companies, businesses more accountable. Like, how could we use the human rights and all its architecture in order to overcome this impunity that there is in place right now?
Talking about challenges. Well, maybe I'll try to connect the border issue and the war issue as of the title, and maybe to come back some of the things that Erica mentioned, and in particular the role of special procedures, as I was the member of the working group on the use of mercenaries that also has a mandate of a very particular type of companies, which is private military and security companies. And as a working group, we presented the reports to both Human Rights Council and to the General Assembly. And we worked a lot because of the nature of our mandate on the issues of contemporary armed conflicts. And in that sense, we very often found, most of our findings, in fact, are that more private military and security companies are present in armed conflict, more likely is that conflict will be intense and long-lasting, because clearly there is the interest, economic interest that is behind the motivation of those companies to be involved in the first place. And I'm not talking just about private military and security companies in a very strict sense. We have a very broad definition, and we comprise also the military industry and armament industry. And we see how armament industry is now profiting from both conflicts that are very, very actual right now. We're talking about Ukraine, Russia, and then Gaza situation and Israel intervention. So companies are very much involved in those. But then coming back to the borders, I think that's something that is less known in terms of the private military and security companies involving. We did a report in 2020 on the role of private military and security companies in border management and migrant detention centers. And we found that this is a multi-billion dollar industry. And when we take into consideration that migration is only going to increase due to the wars, to the climate change, to many other factors, we can see that there is a huge interest by those companies, for those companies, to lobby with different policies at different levels, be that EU, international organizations, states, to present migration as something that is very dangerous, that is very complex, that states don't have enough technology and tools to tackle that. And we see them intervening into these issues. And from what can be done, to come back to your question, we as special procedure mandate experts, and I'm no longer with the working group, but I'm very glad that my colleagues continue the excellent work and very engaged work, can act through the system of allegation letters. When we receive information by victims representative, or whoever may have relevant information, to raise the issue, to bring it to the attention to the experts, who then bring that to relevant state. And what is extremely important, and we have done that a lot during my mandate for sure, is to also bring those allegation letters to non-state actors, such as companies, but also armed groups. And at the current international architecture of accountability between international tribunals, human rights mechanism, and all that, special procedures are the only ones who actually, through the very light formats, can hold non-state actors such as companies to a certain extent accountable. At least it's not really accountability system, but at least to raise the issues and to say this is wrong, and you have some human rights obligations and responsibilities. So that's one thing, and one tool that is currently the only tool at the international, and it should be used. And victims representatives should use this system, because it's really important, because then it can be used at the national level in domestic prosecutions to support domestic proceedings as much as is possible. The second tool that I would say is people themselves. Now, I like to remind people that the UN Charter starts with the people, and it's the only time when we hear the word people. And the rest of the UN Charter addresses to states and talks about states. But it means, it's very symbolic to start the UN Charter with "we the people," because it is for the people that the whole system is actually being created for. States are the tools that should defend people's interests and work for their own people and other people. Yes, we have some articles that say that states have obligation towards other people as well, right? But it is for the people. And who else, right? And we have the experience that we've seen in different thematic issues, or in different voting proceedings in the Human Rights Council, or when we mobilize for arms treaty, that when people is invested in the process, when the civil society is invested, they are pushing, they are actively engaged in it, they raise their voice, then we actually can get to reform the system to different levels on different topics. We can actually get to have some success, and states actually are obliged to react. And when there is no civil society, and right now a PMC treaty, the treaty that is being negotiated on private military and security companies, there is not even 3 civil society organizations in it participating in discussions in the room, then we see that it's really difficult to run the process. So I would say engagement of civil society is very important. And thirdly, and I'll end with that, we need to decolonize our discourse and discussions. Wherever I go, be that in Geneva, or I just came from New York from the Assembly of State Party, I see people full of Western experts, Western lawyers. Very little people come from experts or lawyers from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. We need to globalize discussions. We need to hear all the voices equally. Discussions should represent different regions, and different regions should be involved in those discussions. And so we need to find a way to have the global discourse, not the Western discourse, and to give the global South also the voice. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jelena. Yeah, that's actually a good starting point from to the last round of discussion that I think we can have, because we only have a couple of minutes left, but I would like to give everyone the chance, and maybe building on that, what you've just said, like both with regard to referring to the necessary engagement of civil society in all these processes, but also the globalization of voices, which we also try to do in this 24-hour format a bit. Like, I mean, we only reached out to about 80 participants this time, because 24 hours are also limited, but it's at least like an effort that we make to really also include like people from all over the place, also because of the 24-hour format that's more possible than with other discussions that we organize. So all of you, maybe Erica can start this time. What do you think, what needs to be done in order to organize civil society better, to mobilize in the name of human rights? Maybe just a couple of ideas that come up to your mind, also with regard to the topics that you talked about before.
Maybe I'll just say that, and again, kind of trying to look on the positive side of things, rather than coming up with new ideas, there's a bunch of stuff that we could quite easily fix in the existing system or build upon to make better. Going back to special procedures, one of the really unique and valuating things about them is that they've got this, formal and protected communication channel with civil society. The individuals can directly approach the special procedure. It can do call for inputs, and this is really unique. And I think one thing that is criticised of special procedures is that there's a lot of espousing of views or espousing of criticism without drawing in concrete recommendations for how to make a situation better. And that link to people on the ground, affected communities, civil society organisations, they often have the answers. And so one thing that could pretty quickly and easily be fixed is special procedures kind of drawing into their advocacy, their very important advocacy on these voices, on not just what the problems are, but also how they might be fixed. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Elio, maybe you have some ideas on that as well.
Yeah, to follow, I agree with what has been said so far. The necessity to ensure that the voices of affected communities and the civil society organization are heard at all the different level, whether now we're talking international, at the international level, but also at the national level, is essential. And coming back to what I said in the introductory parts of this discussion, strengthening civil society is more than a catchword. It's really something that needs to be implemented willingly and thoughtfully, in the sense of giving tools and ensuring that the capabilities of people are developed, and that's what also with Border Forensics where we try to do. So I would say, yeah, developing and strengthening the civil society organization, and at the same time also ensuring that within civil society bridges are built between organizations in order to be stronger together, with a bigger collaboration between the different organizations within the civil society working on similar but also different domains.
Thanks a lot. Jelena, you have a final thought and also the final word of this round then.
Well, okay, yes. Just to raise one of my concerns, and I'm sure I'm certainly not the only one, but we are living, as you know, in challenging times, and one particular challenge is the shrinking space of civil society, be that human rights organizations, human rights defenders, or humanitarian organizations, as we are seeing in current situations around the world. So the civil society is actually being pulled between, giving support to those who really need the victims and civilians around the world, and on the other hand, defending themselves, being victims of different systems and attacks on civic space and freedom of expression and freedom of manifestation. So that is something that we really need to be careful about. We need to take this into account, and we need to also ensure that civic space is protected wherever that is in the global north, as we've seen it also in terms of manifestations for Gaza, but also in the global south against extractive companies, for freedom of speech in conflict zones. So civic space really needs to be protected, and we have that responsibility to ensure and to raise our voices for all of them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to the three of you. I think we should continue this conversation at some point, and yeah, and it was great also to have these three different angles on the same problems, more or less. So thanks a lot to the three of you, and I think now before the closing panel, we will still have a video of one of our partners, actually, Laura van Waas, the co-founder of the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion, who could not join us today on the discussion, but she recorded her thoughts on the topics, and we will have that video while we prepare for the closing session. Thanks a lot.
Hi, my name is Laura van Waas, and I am a co-founder and a co-director of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. I am speaking to you today from the Netherlands, but my organization works on this issue all around the world, and it's a real pleasure to connect to all of you wherever you're dialing in from. We're really pleased to be participating in this event to mark the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The focus of our work is actually all around Article 15 of the Declaration, that everyone has the right to a nationality. The right to nationality became embedded in international law through the Universal Declaration, and it has since been reaffirmed across a multitude of UN human rights treaties, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CEDAW Convention, and others. And it also exists in regional human rights instruments and has become an area with really exciting case law emerging over the last few years, where people have actually been able to assert their right to a nationality in courts and before international human rights bodies. And yet you may not know all that much about this issue. Essentially, where someone's right to nationality has been most severely violated, this can leave them without any nationality at all. It can make a person stateless. Statelessness is not a very well-known issue, but it is a global one, and it's a very important one. As we will find out as we talk through this session today, it can have a real impact on the enjoyment of other human rights as well. My organization, ISI, was set up 9 years ago because there was no NGO working at the global level that was fully dedicated to promoting the right to nationality and working with stateless people to ensure that they could enjoy their other human rights. A big part of our work from the very beginning was to raise the profile of statelessness as a human rights issue and make sure that it could gain its place on the global human rights agenda. This has meant doing a lot of advocacy, in particular with Geneva-based institutions. So we've worked with partners in over 100 different countries to make submissions to the Universal Periodic Review. And we've also helped to evaluate the outcome of the review process by looking at recommendations. And we in fact created a database that allows people to explore the recommendations made from the UPR and from other bodies on statelessness and nationality. We've also engaged with treaty bodies like the Committee on the Rights of the Child and others. And we helped to inform a very exciting new Human Rights Council resolution that was adopted just in June that deals specifically with the right to nationality and how it intersects with different forms of discrimination. One of the things that we do is to look at how statelessness actually intersects with other human rights in order to promote a better understanding of the statelessness specific challenges that exist, but also how these can be solved. So for this presentation, as part of this event, we thought it would be nice to zoom in on one of these nexus areas. And we have chosen to look at the nexus between statelessness and the right to education, which is also protected in the Universal Declaration. I've invited my colleague, Denisha Moss, who leads our knowledge building and our children's work, to join me for a conversation about a global initiative that we've been coordinating that just wrapped up a few days ago, an awareness month on childhood statelessness and education. So, Denisha, thank you for joining me for this event. Maybe we can kick things off with you introducing yourself and explaining briefly about how statelessness creates barriers for children's right to education.
Thank you, Laura, and good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all of our listeners and watchers from wherever you may be watching this. I am Denisha Moss, and as Laura indicated, I lead the children's work at ISI as well as the knowledge building program. Laura, to answer your question on how statelessness impacts children's right to education. There are, in fact, a number of barriers that have been identified that effectively stop children from enjoying their right to education. Among those barriers, for example, we know that where children have lack of legal status in a country, no matter whether they may be born in that country, those children often find difficulty to access education where, for example, a state has put in place mechanisms or a system where non-citizen children do not have automatic access to formal education. We've also seen stateless children suffer impact or are impacted where, for example, there are structural barriers. So in effect, there may be a situation where although a state may effectively allow for access to education for all children, but in practice, many children within the state or within that territory may not hold the necessary proof of identity or documentation to be able to register for school. So in that context, whereas there may not be a clear discrimination against non-citizen children, effectively children who don't have proof of identity or children who may be undocumented or may not hold a birth certificate also, in fact, face challenges to go to school. There are other instances as well where stateless families are often those who live on the margins of society. And what that means effectively is that often their parents may not be in a financial situation to be able to support their education. And what that translates into is, of course, additional barriers for those children to be able to afford whatever forms of registration or school uniforms and things like this that in effect also hampers their efforts to go to school. And then we also know that in some instances, there is a sort of kind of situations where children, because of discrimination within maybe the school context, may be unable to register. So there are a number of overarching but also interconnected issues that prevents stateless children from accessing education.
Thank you for setting that out. And it's really important for these nexus areas to have a clear focus, because statelessness really is a global problem. It affects at least 15 million people around the world. And year on year, the problem is also growing because in many cases, stateless parents pass on their statelessness to children. And so children are born second, third, maybe fourth generation stateless. And when they struggle with these barriers to access education, then that impact also grows over time. And so given that it's a global issue and that a statelessness specific response is really needed to ensure that every child is able to go to school, you've been involved in coordinating a month of joined up action to draw attention to these issues and the need to pursue this specialist change. Could you tell us a bit more about this initiative? What were the key activities? How has it been going?
Sure. As you said, because we had identified this as an ongoing and a serious issue affecting stateless children, we thought it would be important to bring greater awareness to this challenge by bringing this issue to the global community. And using, through the work of our partners, we were able to bring together more than 10 organizations around the world who work with stateless children, and in some cases, organizations that don't work with stateless children. And it's been an incredible experience to bring together different types of community-based organizations and international and national organizations, as well as educational institutions to work with children in different ways to sort of bring their awareness to the issue, but also to bring that greater awareness to the global community. So we had amazing projects that were undertaken by partners all over the world that ranged from debate competitions in some places. In Kenya, for example, some of our partners worked with children to work on have debate competitions to talk about what the right to nationality and education mean. And then we also saw artistic performances, theatrical performances, art competitions, and as well partners who were able to develop podcasts and reports on their specific situation. So it was really an incredible opportunity to kind of bring together people across the world and showcase the diversity of this issue through working with different children in different countries everywhere.
Perfect. So there was an awful lot going on. And in order to give everyone who's watching this a bit of a flavor of what these projects look like, I believe you have a short video to show that captures some of the highlights from the projects and the partners in different parts of the world.
Yes, I would be happy to share that with you.
thank you. So alongside all of these very colourful local activities, the Awareness Month also provided a means for people to raise their voices collectively on the issue. And part of it was about sharing a strong message with international actors, including human rights bodies based in Geneva. Could you tell us a bit about this aspect of the month? What were the aims and how did you pursue these?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I mentioned before, this is an issue that that requires more international attention, and we have tried different ways in which to engage the international community, including through those in Geneva, to bring greater awareness. At the start of this campaign, we convened an expert meeting with different actors, including the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education and others. And we've also been working hand in hand in some respects with the Committee on the Rights of the Child to also ensure that this is an issue that is more firmly placed on the agenda. I think it goes without saying that we have done a pretty good job in trying to demonstrate that although access to education is a right that is guaranteed for all children, that there is still a gap and there are some children who are being left behind, and those children include stateless children.
And maybe just kind of in summing up and reflecting on this experience and all of the different moving parts of it, perhaps you could say something about what is the change that you want to see? How do human rights frameworks like the Universal Declaration and the CRC Convention help as a guide star, and kind of what's next for this work?
Yeah, I mean, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly articulates the right of every child to have a nationality. We also understand from the International Human Rights Framework that all children have a right to education. And what we would like to see coming out of this work going forward is that those sorts of standards are applied and include really stateless children, and to ensure that they have, as far as possible, the right to nationality, and also that they have better access and guarantees to education. I believe, we had developed an open letter that was geared toward the international community, to different UN agencies, to different treaty bodies who work on this issue, as well as different international stakeholders. And in terms of what we would like to see going forward is really, I think, a realization and an understanding that stateless children face very specific challenges to realize their right to education. And some of those challenges I outlined at the start of this interview. And so I suppose what would be important is that we continue this work to ensure that those specific challenges are known and understood by all relevant actors, so that they are able to respond and adapt their work in a way which that takes into account those challenges, to ensure that stateless children, as well as other children, have access to education.
Thank you. Thanks, Danisha, and thanks so much for joining. So yeah, there's a lot more that we could say about statelessness, about the right to nationality, about how this impacts also on other human rights. My organization is dedicated to working with stateless people and other allies to ensure that the right to nationality is respected worldwide. I hope that this interview, this presentation, gave you a bit of a flavor of the way in which we are trying to work with partners to bring human rights to life, both at the local level, but also joining that up with international advocacy and with work in Geneva. If you're interested in learning more, you're very welcome to visit our website of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. And you can also find the open letter there that Danisha was referring to, which remains open for signature through until the end of the year at least. Thanks so much for inviting us to be part of this event, and to everyone watching, enjoy the next contributions as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, before our final words on the last 23 hours, I would like to, on behalf of Civic City and Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, say a big thank you to the technicians that have been supporting us here and in other places in Paris and in other studios around the world, and also to the translation. Big thank you. And I would also like to thank the RLS offices that participated in this event. It was great. Apart from the studio in Paris and in Geneva here, we had our colleagues in the offices in New York, Almaty, Manila, New Delhi, colleagues on the COP in Dubai and Johannesburg participating, as well as Berlin, like our colleague Carola. And yeah, now I would also like to extend my thanks to Robert Cohen and Susanna Cherry for the graphics. And yeah, and so I think without all these people, this event would not have been possible. And yeah, now I would like to give all of us a chance to have a final thought on what was happening over the last 23 hours. And maybe, Udi, you want to start?
Perhaps at first I have to remember a little bit the first. Ah oui, en français, c'est vrai. En plus, ça sera plus facile. Non, je me souviens de la fin de la première nuit que nous avions, et tout d'un coup entre Jean Ziegler, qui de toute façon est pour moi une grande personnalité, et nous avions eu cette discussion extrêmement joyeuse et passionnée autour des thèmes que nous avions élaborés, et notamment là aussi des droits. Hein. Ça avait été très important, cette dimension humaine que portait finalement le travail de Jean Ziegler. Mais en écoutant, parce qu'on n'était pas toujours au front, on était parfois écouteurs, je me suis dit souvent, qu'est-ce qu'aurait pensé cette dame en écoutant nos 24 heures. Rosa Luxemburg, je trouve que la période, malheureusement, de son décès, de son assassinat, correspond, est assez proche de ce que nous vivons actuellement dans cette montée du fascisme, montée des extrémismes, montée des autoritarismes, etc., etc. Et que sa lutte pour la démocratie, pour la paix aussi, pour l'internationalité, tout ce qu'elle portait était aujourd'hui et pendant ces 24 heures très présent. Et je pense que c'est très, très important que nous fassions ces petits retours aussi, même si on a essayé de ringardiser un peu la lutte contre le capitalisme, les classes sociales. Mais on a bien vu, Nord-Sud, on a bien vu pendant ces 24 heures, tout ça est ressurgi parce que la situation actuelle le rend à nouveau extrêmement lisible. Nous sommes en un temps où toutes ces choses qu'on a essayé d'effacer ressurgissent. Donc, je suis extrêmement heureux de ces 24 heures. On a eu des moments extrêmement forts. Je me souviens bien entendu de cette ouverture de Doudou Dienne, que disait-il? L'accouchement est difficile. Donc ça, c'est un peu le contraire de ce que je viens de dire. C'est-à-dire, il l'exprimait d'une manière positive, et il a raison, parce qu'après-demain, nous aurons accouché de cette nouvelle société, mais le temps de l'accouchement n'est pas si simple que ça. Et nous sommes dans ce temps difficile où la transformation, bien entendu, est voilà, où ceux qui ne veulent pas la transformation sont de plus en plus autoritaires, de plus en plus, et qu'on quitte la dimension, y compris dans les pays démocratiques ou dans beaucoup de pays démocratiques, il y a peut-être quelques exceptions, mais on quitte la dimension des droits de l'homme. Donc c'est extrêmement important que nous ayons réfléchi sur soi, sur ces questions-là. Voilà, il y a plein d'autres choses à dire, mais je vous passe là.
I'll go ahead and I'll join you speaking English. So yeah, thanks a lot to everyone. And I think what I liked the most was also I love all the technical sides to these events, and a big special and personal thanks to Jocelyn and Sophie and Esteban, who we spent stressful moments with, but very good ones. And what I like the most about these events is how we facilitate people meeting, and we facilitate conversations, and we bring people together from different backgrounds, from different organizations. And I think that's the most important. I think we did a good job. So, and we had very, very good speakers for these 23 hours. And two that really stuck with me are one of the interventions, from our Almaty office that talks about disabled people in Central Europe. That was very, very powerful and important as well. And one panel we had today on the importance of culture and the fight for human rights and social rights, and how to bring that together to make a better world. I think that's what we're all trying to do. Even if it sounds a bit idealistic, I think it's kind of the aim of these events.
I wanted to quote Rosa, and now I'm in the struggle because there are two quotes which correspond to, but I think one is very important. It is in the tiny struggles of individual peoples that the great movements of history are most truly revealed. And I think what these 24 hours try is to interconnect struggles, tiny little struggles of one or two person who's continuously fighting for the interest of collective rights and big movements, and to bring them together and to listen and to exchange. And there are transversal problems, and sometimes, and this was one panel we just had where we said sometimes you also have to be confident on the struggle of the other and to solidarize, even if you haven't understand all of the elements of the fight of the others. It's important to stand together, because those who have no idols and nothing to lose, they stand together because they don't question. And to be strong against these kind of oppressions, it's important that we are in the logic of a movement. And I already had this feeling in the other nights that we know of the struggles of the other, but sometimes we are focused on our struggles and we can't do everything at the same time. And it's very important to separate the different tasks, but then to stand together. And I think this for me is a very important element. And this is the atmosphere which in this 24 hours is that you really take over. You have 15 minutes and then you go to the next topic, to the next question, and you refer to the struggle of the other. And I think this is for me a very symbolic action. And so I can integrate the second quote, because this is before revolution happens, it is perceived as impossible. After it happens, it is seen as having been inevitable. And I think this is something which can give us hope. And why we are quoting so much Rosa Luxemburg is that I think that this foundation, and we have heard this in the 24 hours, is so important, because we need in these times when our places of agency are in danger, we need places where we are supported, where we can be located, and with this starts new struggles and reinforcement. And that's why I'm so thankful that again we could make this round around the world, this dance of thoughts, of struggles, of activism around the world with you. And it's we see a certain development also because so many studios could and partners in other parts of the world were willing to work with us and made wonderful hours. And I can quote all these hours, but I have to say the Johannesburg studio brought so important topics on the floor about the relation of civic rights and economic rights, and that we have to work on reclaiming a hierarchy of these rights, that the civic rights are in the forefront because the human being is in the center. And the last quote of Rosa, and then I finish, you just can understand the humans if you love them. So I give maybe over to Jeanne. Or to my neighbor.
Moi, je veux juste ajouter, remercier toutes les personnes qui ont participé, les participants qui ont amené tellement de réflexions intéressantes, qu'ils ont voulu partager avec nous ce moment. Je crois que c'est hyper important de donner un espace, faire de l'espace pour des échanges, pour que les gens puissent se connecter les unes avec les autres, et que c'est autant plus important aujourd'hui parce que il faut protéger les droits humains. Il ne faut pas seulement les promouvoir, mais il faut vraiment les protéger. On a des backlash, des mouvements qui sont contre les droits, donc c'est très important de mettre ensemble des activistes, des personnes qui ont ça au centre de leur mission. Donc, merci.
Alors, juste un mot pour dire que pour moi, cet événement, il est une manifestation concrète d'une dynamique de solidarité internationale, et je pense que ce terme de solidarité internationale est vraiment important. On a parfois un peu tendance à travailler chacun dans notre domaine ou chacun sur notre territoire, etc. Et que ce que cet événement veut dire, c'est aussi que ces liens-là entre les différentes luttes, comme tu disais, ou entre les différents thèmes, entre les différents espaces, que ce soit des personnes qui travaillent dans des associations, dans le milieu académique, au sein des Nations Unies ou dans d'autres espaces. Je pense que ces liens-là, ils sont à préserver, à protéger aussi et à continuer à construire. Et que c'est aussi ça que cet événement veut montrer. Voilà.
Okay, yeah, maybe I continue, and then I think Rudi wants to also present something that grew out of these events to all of us, also maybe with like an incentive for the future. Yeah, what I think when we first started planning this session, there were a lot of crises going on already in this world, but more crisis came, more conflict came in the time being, and maybe that's why maybe it all had to happen in the year that the Human Rights Declaration celebrated its 75th anniversary. Also to as all of us already said, to make it visible and to make everyone know that it's so important to defend these rights. And that it is also important, and that was like that was said on the last panel that I was on, that we as civil society defend these rights. And what I liked in all kinds of sessions that we had today was that civil society was presented in all its diversity, maybe its complexity also. There was reference to failures of civil society, but also to proposals on how to make civil society in all these international, global, national, regional, local fights more stronger than it is not right now. And I think, yeah, this moment when we look at the world today, I think it has never really been so obvious that we as civil society have to reclaim the space, as we said before, but also reclaim our position in the negotiations about rights and in all these international treaties, in all these international convents. We as civil society, as this last as one on the last panel said, the Human Rights Declaration starts with we, the people. So we also have to take it in our hands, and I think that is one of the things that was very visible in all these panels, that people do try to take things in their hands, but we might even have to try harder looking at the world today. Then other things that just popped up during the discussions were repoliticizing the debates. It has become like very technical at parts, and it's even for us working here in Geneva, it's sometimes difficult to understand what it's all about. But yeah, I think it's time to not look at it as like a complicated space of technical negotiations, but a space for political discussions. And I think I hope that this 24 hours, we're one of these spaces maybe from which political discussions on human rights and how to overcome their violations could start from. I also heard, and this comes with it, organizing, mobilizing. So I think we really have to start serious discussions about how to engage even more with people nowadays. I mean, we now had 24 hours a discussion with 80 participants, and hopefully loads of people will watch the outcome of this over the next couple of weeks. But still, we only reach out to like a very limited percentage of the populations. And I think, yeah, we really have to be critical with ourselves and think about how to do that better in the future. This also has to do with finances. We have to have more radical ideas. We're like very, very quiet in our limited spaces and trying to make the most of it. But I think to be able to reach out to more people, to involve more people, we really have to have more critical thoughts about, more radical thoughts also about how to raise not only the finances, but also the people power, like to do all of that. And then it's all in the name of solidarity, no? We really have to get out of our own comfort zones, and it's of course very comfortable for us here in Geneva to talk about human rights violations around the world, but we have to leave those comfort zones and come up with strategies that are maybe takes away the comfort from us, but helps us to be more solidary with other people around the world.
And maybe, if I am allowed to say, invite the others. And I think this event did this in our comfort zone, because sometimes you can say something and our comfort zones are in danger too. So it can be that tomorrow we can't speak anymore, and in some parts of Europe it's already starting, and it depends on which part of population you are already in danger. And we had some of participants who had the courage to raise their voice even if they made themselves in danger. And on the other hand, it's precisely this abri, là, je sais même pas le mot, this shelter maybe, you have given, which allowed that we can raise the voice. So maybe we leave it but we keep it in the same time, and we give kind of hospitality to those who raise the word. But maybe I give the word to you already, that you can speak about another question to leave traces.
Yes, I will speak about a part who was a little bit in the shadow, and I have to make this. I hope I can do.
Shall I speak? Meanwhile, you are.
No, I think it's okay. I hope so. You see the screen? No. Ah.
So
yeah, it's about the website. The website we do. Very good. The website we do for this manifestation, but was a little bit concentrated in we can say occidental and local dimension. And the idea is that on this website, which is based for this third night of the Universal Declaration, we will see if in the fourth we have another topic, so we can enter other topics. But in this case, is the Universal Declaration, and we have different explication about each terminology who are inside of this element. But I think I will switch in français.
Toi, tu peux parler français et je peux dire après, sinon je peux ajouter en anglais.
Ça sera beaucoup plus simple. Et donc, la première recherche est une recherche qui peut être linguistique. Et l'idée est véritablement que les quelques définitions que nous avons trouvées se voient complétées par d'autres cultures, d'autres manières de voir sur ces concepts. Et on sait très bien que tout concept, que ce soit le concept de paix, que ce soit le concept de rébellion, sont des concepts qui sont très fortement liés à la question de la langue et donc qui se transforment aussi avec les langues et avec les cultures. Nous allons avoir, bien entendu, et c'est déjà un tout petit peu près, les podcasts. Alors ça va, on n'a pas encore eu le temps de recouper toutes les choses. Pour l'instant, c'est les grandes parties, mais dans quelques jours, ça sera heure par heure. Et vous pourrez donc cliquer sur le programme que nous avons eu et à chaque fois entendre ces différents podcasts. Ensuite, et c'est important, nous avons aussi introduit 2 autres chapitres qu'on va compléter en fonction d'ailleurs de ce qui s'est dit pendant ces 24 heures, qui est un chapitre sur les luttes, où on essaye d'expliquer où se passe quelle lutte, sous quels critères, etc. etc. C'est aussi une chose qui peut être complétée par tout un chacun. Nous allons le faire de notre côté, mais il serait bon que ça ne soit pas uniquement notre plume qui s'y mette, mais que ce soit justement les représentations du monde. Et puis, la même chose sur les grands débats de l'ONU, de l'UNESCO, etc., sur ces thématiques-là. Donc, voilà l'état actuel de la structure, mais Vera va prendre la parole sur la suite.
So the interest was to leave traces and to enter in this culture which the 24 hours are doing, to reading collectively these important convention, but to augment this kind of important, almost civic monument, and to help to understand, because often, and that was in all these discussions, we use the convention, we interpret, but we don't bring realities behind, and that's why it can be instrumentalized. That's why it can be also misused, as we have heard, and just some of the articles can be used. And what was for us important is really we start a collective reading of this convention, and that's why we invite all those who participated today, but also colleagues of you, to work with this open archive and to annotate, to help rereading, to bring in the question of decolonizing colonial thoughts who are still inscribed, but not by destroying, but by augmenting and continuously writing this convention. And precisely this is the instrument of today. And it's in the same time the entrance of something which we thought together with you, Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, to say that we, and this was a demand of the participants of all the 3 nights, that we need a platform of working together, of connecting, of exchanging tools of struggles, develop new instruments, and to share. Because again, I quote Asina to say, we can't do all in the same time, and we have to profit from what the other already achieved and what has functioned, and to try to implement this in our context too. And this is the idea, to develop a collective platform for global social rights, and this hopefully will the project, the future project for what this first website is the entrance, and that's and you are invited to think with us and to work with us on that. You find on the website all the contacts, and you are very welcome to inspire us with formats, ideas, and thoughts. So I can give over again to the Geneva Observers, maybe for the final word on that.
Well, I mean, we're like 13 minutes before 5 o'clock. We could still continue for 13 minutes, but we don't also have to overstretch it. So yeah, any final thoughts from anyone?
Or maybe you can speak about if a platform like that could serve, or where you see also.
We don't speak about finance.
Future.
We have to go out of reality.
No, I mean, like on several occasions, not only on the social rights nights, but also on other occasions, I think we have seen the necessity of like a more continuous collective work. I mean, so far we've to do these 3 editions of the Global Social Rights Nights, and there was a lot of preparation going on and all of that, and we try to also use the outcome of the material that we collected, which is like a very rich archive by now already of statements, of perspectives, of descriptions of failures, but also of proposals for change. But yeah, I think what we know from all our other activities is that it would be very helpful if we could constantly work together, and constantly listen to each other and discuss, think, dream with each other. So of course, I mean, that's definitely in our thoughts, like of how to continue this this global collaboration on a more continuous basis. And yeah, maybe like if anyone of our participants and the people that listen to this to these 24 hours have ideas on that, we're also very open to listen to those. And yeah, I mean that's it's a good start. I think that we now have this website sort of as an archive of the 3 nights that we've already done, and I think yeah, it's a good start. But of course, we should start from there and then come up with something even more solid, I think, in the future. That's for sure. Okay, so yeah, unless you still want to have a final thought on something.
I will also remember some elements of these nights who was so fantastic. I must say, these interviews in Manila, who persons speak about the afraidness to be militant, and this woman who say, I'm happy and it's not a problem because I was every time in this situation. So I didn't have any more, je n'ai plus peur. I'm not anymore in afraidness. And I think this, we have a little bit to learn this because our zone de confort va probablement un tout petit peu s'effriter. Donc, il faut qu'on apprenne, y compris peut-être dans certains cas, à rentrer dans une disparition, mais même déjà, et c'est un thème sur lequel nous, on a beaucoup travaillé, c'est à quel moment commence l'illégalité. L'illégalité, c'est quand on pense aux droits de l'homme, on est presque obligé de ne pas obéir pour pouvoir être humaniste et pour pouvoir correspondre à ce qui est écrit dans les droits de l'homme. Il faut soutenir les personnes qui sont dans des situations peut-être illégales. Il faut, et ces choses-là sont en train de s'épaissir. C'est-à-dire cette nécessité presque pour des raisons humanitaires, pour des raisons humaines, de sortir de ce qui est autorisé, puisqu'on nous autorise de moins en moins.
And what I have seen is that there are moments of fear and moments of tiredness because you're really and also of feelings to want to give up, but then there's also, and this was this night too, there's some optimism, and sometimes you have a moment when you have achieved something, and it's important to share this, and this can give hope again. And I remember, and that's why I was so happy that you invited us. Once when I worked for Amnesty International, there was a person coming and he said, I know that I never would have access to the human rights, but this was my prayer all the nights. And I left finally the prison. And even if it was kind of idle thing, it was something concrete and written. And I think for me always, and I have the eyes and the hearts of all those nights of people in, they go with me. And I think what we have seen here is something we shared the words, but it was very intimate, and it's exactly what I think is very, very important. And I think there is this definition of peace is that in every dialogue and every little exchange, there's something existential and important, and that's why we have to continue to speak together and to share and to give hope when you are tired, and to share these moments of deception that we don't get arrogant if we have success, and that we speak about the success to give hope to the other.
Okay, so I guess it's on me to call it a day here in Geneva at almost 5 p.m. And I would like to use that opportunity to also thank you, Vera and Rudy, for this third collaboration on this great process and program and project that would not be possible without you. And also to my colleagues from the Geneva office, and also the ones that are not here today, that made all of this possible with like very hard work for like a couple of months already. So yeah, I hope this was not the last of our editions. I look forward to the next one, and yeah, I hope we see each other again soon.
One more.
Thank you.